Why, hello everybody. I have something special to show you. So, this might be a familiar sight to a few of you because I made a video on it a couple of years ago. However, though I'm glad I made the video, I know I could do better with the quality and the audio especially. And plus, I actually have the ability to show you range footage of this thing instead of just yapping about it for 15 minutes straight. So for the uninitiated, this was a German K98k that's been through a few subtle and, dare I say, tasteful upgrades. They're not going to buy that. Now, I know many of you have burning questions as to what the hell happened to this thing and how we got to, well, this point here. Before we do that, though, let's take a moment to go to the range and actually show this thing being fired like I actually wanted to the first time around. Oh, so yes, wasn't that just a joy to watch? So how did we get to that point? How did we get from something that should look more like this to this polished turd right here? So this isn't my first rodeo posting this thing on the internet, and usually there's going to be a small minority of people who will say, oh my god, you destroyed a war relic, this is a piece of history, how could you? I am pulling on my balls very hard right now. Fret not, my friend, because when I received this rifle, you'll be relieved to know that this was not an original K98. All previous alterations were done before I even laid my hands on it. You see, when I received this rifle, it was a, say it with me, irreversibly botched sporter. Now for the uninitiated, sporterization is when somebody takes what was originally a military style of rifle, like this Italian Carcano right here with a folding bayonet, and they reduce it to something of its more simple components for the intent of hunting with it as a lighter, more feasible brush gun than it would have been in its original configuration. Like this example here, you can see somebody removed the bayonet entirely and shortened the stock just a little bit to make it more usable. So immediately following World War II, this was actually quite common because it was much more financially feasible to just get a cheap surplus military rifle because they existed in the, let's be real, millions, and they were coming in droves from importers as well. So they were seen as a more viable option as opposed to just buying a name brand hunting rifle. Now, as for this particular example, unfortunately the only salvageable and original component of it was the receiver, which was drilled and tapped to mount a scope. I'm not happy about it, but I took advantage of it. Look how unhappy I am. Otherwise, the original stock had been discarded along with the original barrel bands, hardware, bayonet lugs, and sights. Not to mention the original 8mm Mauser barrel had been replaced with a 30 caliber barrel blank for some reason, and it wasn't even functional because it wasn't chambered for anything. So that begs the question, how did we get from a rifle that was initially chambered in a full-size cartridge like 8mm Mauser all the way down to the small pistol caliber 45 ACP? Let's take another trip to the range and take a few more shots with this, and we will talk about just that. Monkey. So Jay, how did you get to this point where you took a rifle that was normally chambered in the big thing and made it into a small thing? Wouldn't it have made more sense to simply chamber it in more big thing instead of doing that? How right you are. But hear me out. Now, unfortunately, at a young age, I was diagnosed with what we would call the stupid. It's terminal. So at the time I built this thing, I was just a broke-ass, part-time job working college student at a local gun shop, and I had a profound obsession for anything having to do with World War II small arms, especially anything that was prototypes, rare, experimental, anything that wasn't common on the front lines. It got me bricked up. Sorry, that wasn't very appropriate. Allow me to correct myself. It got me incredibly bricked up. So of course it didn't take me long to discover that the DeFile Carbine existed, and yes, I'm very sorry, that's exactly where this is going. For those of you who do not know what the DeFile Carbine is, it was a specialist weapon issued to British commandos in World War II. The intent of the DeFile Carbine was to be used as a silent weapon to dispatch enemy units when you're behind enemy lines without wanting to be detected, because who on earth would actually want to be detected? I have no idea. So the DeFile Carbine was heralded as one of the most silent weapons ever issued in a military context. Think of it like a well rod, but for like medium distance. Now, of course, it wasn't a sniper's weapon by any means, but the intent of the rifle was, I'm here hiding in a bush at objective A, and some jerk off in a Hugo Boss uniform and a red armband is blocking my path to objective B. I need to deal with this so I can get on with it and not alert everybody in the area. And from what I've heard, it did a very good job at that. So if it wasn't obvious already, I saw the DeFile Carbine and thought, I fucking want one. However, due to the specialist nature of the DeFile Carbine, they were already in limited quantities. I believe less than 300 of them have ever been made in their entire production run. Top that off with about 80 years of passage since then, you can imagine there's not a lot of surviving examples. And when one does pop up, they tend to cost more than your average person makes in a year, so that wasn't happening. So from that point I started wondering, was there replicas out there or modern equivalents to it? Was there anything that was a close facsimile to the DeFile Carbine that was actually attainable? Short answer is no, there wasn't. So just to keep things interesting, let's go back to the range and take a few more shots with this just so you can get a better idea for how quiet this actually is. But after we're done with that, we'll talk about how we got from DeFile Carbine to what I've started calling DeFile Carbine. Now, there were small gunsmithing outlets at the time, I don't know if they're still around, and they manufactured DeFile carbines from existing Enfield rifles, and it was a much more faithful replica, but of course that would require me to sporterize my Enfield, which I wasn't really a fan of doing, and unfortunately even that outlet cost a lot more money than I was willing to spend. So I had to get creative. You see, I've adapted this ancient technique called lowering my goddamn standards. It's worked wonders. It's the only reason I can look in the mirror every morning. So as I said in my last video, I was mindlessly stumbling around the internet, surprisingly not putting any mileage on my incognito browser, and I was looking for something that was simply a bolt-action rifle in 45 ACP that can accept a silencer. Once again, I unfortunately found nothing, but I did find a company called Rhineland Arms. Now at the time, Rhineland Arms mostly manufactured accessories for various firearms, but at the time, the most prolific thing, in my mind at least, was the fact that they made barrel conversion kits for Mauser pattern rifles. So if you didn't know already, Mauser pattern rifles are among the most common military bolt-action rifles you're going to find, because it was one of the most copied and fielded rifles in pretty much every major power in the world, including us, because that's where we got the 1903 Springfield basically. So it just so happened that Rhineland manufactured a barrel in 45 ACP, and it also came with an adapter that allowed you to use 1911 magazines in pretty much every common Mauser variant. And with that being said, of course, it didn't take me long to march my fat ass up to the local gun shop I worked at and ask the guy behind the counter if they had any Project Mausers, Sporter Mausers, Bear receivers, or pretty much anything I can work on without feeling guilty. And now we've come full circle. So I'll talk a little bit more about this kit in detail in just a moment, but let's take another range trip and shoot this thing a few more times. Nice. Just to get a little bit of a palate cleanser before moving on with more yapping. Gotta get my cool guy shades on. Safety first. So when you receive the kit, it's going to come with a few components. Number one is, of course, the barrel. It is a 45 ACP barrel, like I mentioned before. It is 16.5 inches long, threaded 578 by 28, which is, I believe, the standard American thread pitch for 45 ACP. And it utilizes a Savage style locking collar, which apparently is very good and easy for head spacing and installation. I wouldn't know myself because I had to pay the gunsmith to yank off that 30 caliber barrel blank, and he just threw on the 45 ACP barrel while he was at it. The other component, which I've already mentioned before, is the adapter that allows the rifle to utilize Colt 1911 pattern magazines. With one caveat, you will need to provide your own magazine release button, but whatever, I just got one off Brownells for like $10, it doesn't really matter. Preferably you should use an extended style of magazine release if you can find one. The final component is a large oversized ejector. I will just run some B-roll of it because I got this chunky monkey right in front of me and I can't move. Isn't ya right? The kit's nice because it's affordable and it allows you to emulate something that otherwise you would not be able to have by any stretch of the imagination, but of course it's not perfect. However, I will take full ownership and admit that most of these issues are probably my fault because I did not install the components with the degree of precision that I probably should have. With that being said, if you have a basic mechanical inclination and a basic set of tools, I think you can do it. If I can, you absolutely can as well. So with that being said, my only word of warning to anybody who might be interested in getting one of these for themselves is that the 45 ACP adapter that allows you to use 1911 magazines does need to be installed quite meticulously. You see, the adapter doesn't actually come with any sort of feed ramp, so you're going to be using the native feed ramps that were originally in the rifle when it was chambered in 8mm Mauser. So the 45 ACP actually needs to jump a gap directly into the chamber in order to successfully cycle. You can imagine this will cause some issues. If you don't have the angle perfect on the magazine block when you install it, it's going to cause feeding problems. Now, as for my lazy ass, I decided to just not run magazines completely full. 5 rounds per magazine seems to work just fine, but anything more than that causes rounds to nosedive and get stuck. But at the end of the day, the rifle really doesn't have any practical intent. This is entirely for my own recreation and a conversation piece. I've said it once and I'll say it again. Not all guns need to be practical. Shocking, I know. Now, with that out of the way, I will say this thing has one of the highest smiles per dollar ratios of anything I have in this whole collection of bullshit behind me. I would go as far to say this is in my top 5, maybe even my top 3 favorite rifles to shoot. It's incredibly satisfying to use, the recoil is minimal, and most importantly, it is stupidly quiet. Now let's go ahead and put our nerd glasses on for a second and talk about what exactly makes this such a quiet setup as opposed to other conventional rifles. So when you fire a modern rifle, you're typically going to hear 3 sounds. 3 sounds for my European audience. All like 4 of you. The first one is the most blatant and loud noise of them all. It is the actual report of the firearm discharging, the bang at the end of the barrel, if you will. But how do you deal with that? Well, it's actually quite easy. You put a silencer on it. And yes, I forgot to mention I use silencer and suppressor interchangeably. I don't really care. We are in a time where we call them cans, whisper pickles, and yeeter discreeters, so I think the nomenclature is lost at this point. So with the sound of the gunshot effectively muffled, what else do we have to deal with? Well, the second sound, and I would say is the second loudest one, is the sound of the bullet breaking the speed of sound. Of course, it doesn't take a gun expert to understand that bullets are really fucking fast. A standard rifle cartridge like, let's say 5.56, out of the correct barrel length can travel at almost Mach 3. The threshold for the speed of sound is right around 1100 feet per second, give or take, depending on your environment, and something like a 5.56 can travel at around 3000 feet per second. And when you fire one of those rounds, you're going to hear a loud cracking reverberation downrange following the projectile to its target. Observe my 9mm. You hear that? That right there. So how do we deal with that? Once again, the solution is quite simple. You use a bullet that's slower than the speed of sound, like 45 ACP. All standard loadings of 45 ACP are going to travel at around 850 to 950 feet per second, whereas something like your typical 9mm cartridge like this will travel at around 1200 feet per second. Now, just because the round fires a slower bullet, that does not mean that it is less effective. 45 ACP actually has twice the mass of a 9mm bullet. So yes, it's slower, but it retains a lot more kinetic energy, and it can be shockingly effective out to moderate distance, more so than people would think. I believe the original effective range on the DeFile Carbine was like 250 meters, but don't quote me on that. I know for a fact that with my 45 ACP shitbox, I can easily hit targets out to 200 yards with pretty boring regularity. So we've dealt with the sound of the gunshot, and we dealt with the sound barrier breakage. What else could there possibly be? Well, this applies more to modern rifles like this AR here, but it's actually the sound of a semi-automatic action reciprocating every time you fire it. So every time I pull the trigger on this AR here, this bolt carrier group is going to reciprocate about as fast as you can blink your eye, and it is not exactly quiet. Not to mention that not all guns are perfect from the factory, so putting a suppressor on one of these tends to over-gas it. And those excess gases, when not dealt with properly, are going to vent out of the ejection port because the bolt will start moving sooner than you think it would, and that results in something we call ejection port pop. And just to drive the point home once again, those gases, when they get in the shooter's face, are not pleasant by any means. The gases be hot, the gases be spicy, and it's basically like snorting horseradish. So how do we deal with that? Oh, once again, it's quite simple. Use a bolt action rifle, because you, the user, are the one who chooses to reciprocate the action. I can fire a round out of this, go home, shit, shower, and shave, and then eject the cartridge if I so want to. Congratulations, you have learned how to make an effective suppressed rifle setup. Go ahead and give yourself a round of applause, pat yourself on the back, pull on your balls very hard. Now, kind of wrapping things up here, in summary, I think this rifle is definitely something that is more sentimental than anything to me. It's not of the best build quality. In fact, this is my first rifle build predating even my first AR. I'm very proud of it, and it's only a face a mother can love, of course, but I'm the mama. And minus the cost of the suppressor and the red dot sight, I am $260 deep in this thing, so you really can't go wrong there. So if you happen to just have a Mauser rifle collecting dust that's been sporterized or is just inoperable or irreversibly in bad condition, this is actually a valid route you can take with it. They actually make really good test beds for gunsmithing projects, and you can do a lot with these rifles. The Mauser action is an incredibly strong action, and it's suitable for many calibers. In fact, I'm like 99% sure this thing is good to go running 45 Super for the 5 people out there who run 45 Super. So with that being said, I'm going to conclude with this. This rifle is incredibly fun. It's absolutely worth trying to do yourself, and you're never going to be done messing with it because I'm pretty sure there's a couple other projects I have in mind pertaining to this particular build. I'm just not quite sure yet. I thought about SBRing it. I thought about changing out the furniture. I thought about finally finishing the barrel that comes in the white. There's a lot of options here. So if you like this, let me know because I'm always looking forward to talking to you guys in the comment section. And if there's any other older videos from my channel you would like to see me revisit, I'd be glad to do them because let's be real, I started this channel with the guns I'm most passionate about. And now that I have a better camera, a better audio, a better setup in general, I think it would be worth revisiting some of those classics. Oh, and speaking of classics, I found out pretty recently this is actually a DUV 41 K98. So there's a small, but non-zero chance this was a Zia 41 sniper rifle. Anyway, have a great day, you guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next one. Stay safe, take care, and have a good one.